and welcome to this episode of the Event Manager podcast, Reimagining Business Strategies to Architect the Future of the Event Industry with Kim Myhre. Kim Myhre is the founder and managing partner of Experience Designed. And in this episode, we talk about the need for redesigning experiences in a human-centered approach, the challenge of changing an industry that aims to be just flawless, how a bad speaker experience makes it hard for speakers to deliver compelling sessions at virtual events. We talk about how the event industry is learning a lot from TV broadcasting. We also talk about how event companies should focus on the benefits they provide to clients above the vehicle, in this case the events that they use to do so. And finally, we talk about how the future of the event industry will inevitably be more tech integrated. I hope you enjoy this episode of the Event Manager podcast and you consider subscribing and even leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.
And now for a word from our sponsors, PHL Life Sciences, a division of the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau. Host your convention or trade show in Philadelphia, one of America's leading life sciences hubs. PHL Life Sciences, the first and only CVB division of its kind, will connect you to the professionals at the forefront of your industry and to a culture you can only find in Philadelphia. A city known for its rich history that's forging a bright future, Philadelphia challenges the expected and defies convention. A world of discovery is waiting. Visit phlife.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Event Manager podcast. On this episode, I'm delighted to have Kim Myhre as our guest here with us today. Kim, thank you for joining us. You're in London, I believe, or somewhere near London?
I'm very near London.
Okay, and I'm based in Denmark, so we're actually two Europeans talking, and they don't know where the listeners are listening to, but it's always interesting. Thank you for joining me today. It's really interesting. I've been following your work for a little while. We've only known each other for a few years maybe, but I've been following your work and I see lots of interesting content around experience design, and we have the Experience Design Summit coming up. So hopefully you will be joining us for that. And it should be a fun experience. But for people that don't know you, Kim, can you tell us a little bit about your story in a succinct way? And I guess what excites you about this crazy industry?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, I started out in sort of marketing, and part of that marketing was in developing or designing event experiences. Back in the day, primarily in my early years, was focused on the tech industry and the growth of the tech industry. At one point in my career, I actually ran a large U.S. trade show called Comdex. It actually took place in 22 countries around the world under license. So it was a pretty significant and pretty large event. And from there, went into the agency world, really focused on, with the Comdex experience, really focused on reinventing or trying to reinvent the Comdex approach from one which was very traditional trade show focused to one which was more community and commerce based. And so from there,
can you expand on that a little bit? I'm kind of curious. What do you mean by 20 events happening at the same time?
Not happening at the same time, happening in 20 different locations around the world. For example, in Switzerland, there was Comdex Orbit. There was Comdex Tokyo. There was Comdex in Greece. Comdex in Japan. Comdex China.
So rather than having only one massive event, you had lots of smaller events, but still had one big event.
Yeah. And typically, and the way kind of that happened was that the Comdex brand was quite significant in the U.S. It happened twice a year in the U.S. And also in Canada. But a lot of the exhibitors and a lot of the attendees were international, and so it was natural extension to reach out into those markets directly. And where there were large tech events in a local country like in Korea or wherever, we often partnered under license with those large tech events and created a Comdex branded event. And so sponsors then were able to buy sort of international sponsorship opportunities and those sorts of things. And even then, we're going back quite a few years now, even then, we're going back 20 years or more. even then focused on online promotional opportunities and those kinds of things. So there was a lot of that kind of work, but a lot of it took really understanding, building a real strategy around the event. Up until then, the strategy was really focused on exhibitor sales. I mean, that was the primary driver, which I think is true of most large trade shows. Instead,
and do you
we're
think
thinking more about the community?
In part, that move to the smaller events was to create a better user experience for the people that were in those communities.
Yeah, and expand the reach of sort of some of these global tech companies, who were looking to build market opportunities in Asia and in Asian companies in Europe and in Africa and in the Middle East and so forth. So it was about opening up market opportunities for international players, for global players. I mean, that was really part of the reason for that kind of branding.
And where did you go from there?
Brand they recognized, because they had participated in it, and believed in the quality of it, and so that was kind of part of how the brand expanded. And my role there as sort of president of Comdex was really the strategy of how to take that brand, which had existed for quite a number of years, and translate it into more of a community-based brand where it was more focused on understanding the audience, understanding audience needs, building specialized programming, moving online, all those kinds of things that we were doing at the time. And so a lot of that work that I did naturally translated into what agencies were doing at the time. Then I ended up going to George P. Johnson. I spent 10 years there as the managing director of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, growing that business. And from there I left to go to Freeman, which is another large U.S., they would call themselves global, but primarily U.S. organization. I launched their agency group here in Europe called Freeman XP, and did that for a number of years. And then from there, ended up at MCI, helping MCI develop a new agency format for how they engaged not just their association clients, but also their growing corporate portfolio. And that was, about how to really look at using more multi-channel strategies for building, less focused on the specific logistics of the event and more on the overall customer experience and customer content experience. And so I did that. So that's, I don't know, that we're talking here, 30 years of working around the events business. So, I've been around for a while. In 2020, I left MCI and started Experience Design, partnered with a couple of colleagues of mine who I've worked with over the years, a creative director who's pretty well known in the business, and a strategy director who actually lives in Denmark. And the three of us sort of set up an approach to helping. At the time, we found there were agencies and even clients, brands who were trying to reimagine how to do events and reimagine how to create more engaging experiences for their audiences to achieve their goals. Up until, I think in many ways, the events business had become a broadcast business. I mean, people measured success by how many people came to the event versus what the overall engagement was and what the impact was. And up until just recently, to be honest, data was very scarce and very thin on the ground. And most event organizers didn't really use data very much, even if they collected it. So the new sort of approach that we've been taking is what we call a more human-centered approach, which is to say, who is the audience? And let's really understand who they are, not just their title and job description, but who they are. Are they risk takers? Are they people who are more conservative? What is the nature of your audiences that you're attracting? And then what do they need? What do they find desirable? But more importantly is, how can you engage them and encourage them to see things your way? I mean, that was essentially, it's a marketing exercise. And in the end, marketing is a guest in the house of sales, right? So the whole idea here is build experiences that encourage people to think in certain ways. And that means really understanding the people and drilling deep into that, building personas, understanding customer journey design, all that sort of stuff, which is what we do essentially in helping agencies do that.
Is it fair to say that your career is all about reimagining business strategy, but that you're
Yeah.
doing that through understanding people deeply?
Yeah, I think that is the primary characteristic of my entire career, really has been about reinventing, reimagining how things work. In fact, what's really interesting is someone just recently sent me an article, which is on my website, actually, which I wrote in 2010 about hybrid events, which was very interesting, that we were talking about hybrid events in 2010, and only recently they've become something that people recognize. And of course, because it's always amazed me that people are constantly changing and adopting technology. I mean, we live in this sort of part live world, and yet events just really haven't kept pace with that. They, in fact, they're still very much using a sage on stage model of content, which is a couple, 1,000 years old, if not more. And we still think that that's the way to do it. I think it's clear that, if you really let your mind expand around the idea of how to engage audiences and what motivates them, even if you just walked in their own shoes with that kind of empathy, you would find that most events are really damn boring.
It's funny, actually, because I was also participated and kind of helped to plan in some small ways a few hybrid events between maybe 2010 and 2012, 13. And do you think it was the technology that, I guess, sprouted at that point and made them possible, but then there wasn't a need, like a pandemic, for hybrid events, and that's why they kind of weren't top of mind for the last few years?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of where the technology was and the state of technology at the time. And I think it was also a case of where we were as consumers at the time, and how engaged we are today with technology, and how we live in a very different way. And that really is, it's recent, isn't it? It's in the last 10, 15, maximum 20 years that technology curve is, has gone the way it's gone. I mean, so I think it's that. I also think, the industry moves really slowly, just like most larger organizations, event organizers in particular, or in my case that I've been dealing with, it's hard to change. They have a financial model that really works for them. And the way to drive profitability is to do exactly what they have been doing, just do it more efficiently. Whenever you try to experiment or do something unknown or risky, it can be costly. And so, the reality of it is, and it may not work. And one of the words that I think only the events industry uses, maybe they use it in culinary arts, but is this word flawless, flawless execution. It's become sort of a mantra, which means that if you're an event planner, caution is your key word. You want to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So experimenting is usually not high on your agenda, which keeps you in a stasis where the industry doesn't really move forward in a way that it could. Much of the technology that's been around for the last couple of years, I've attended live events and it's been there, but it's had to sponsor itself to be there, and it's been in the background. It hasn't been in the foreground. And I think we're starting to see that change, and I think that's really positive.
So I assume you think it's worthwhile taking these risks, but how do you put that into a business proposal? How do you go to a C-suite and say, look, we need to take these risks, and they're going, there's too much risk. How do you balance that out?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's because I think there's lots of history out there now where we know companies that have their businesses become obsolete or been disrupted by technology. We're seeing it in the energy field. We're seeing it in the automotive industry. We're seeing it in the media world. We have the examples of Kodak and video stores, and there are lots of examples here where again, those businesses played a role at a certain time and place, but didn't.
I mean, those examples are classic, and a lot of people quote the Kodak example and lots of other ones. But do you think that there are also a lot of companies that did something innovative, failed, disappeared, and nobody's ever heard about it, and that we're picking on the classic examples to make a point, but you know what I mean? Like it's like that kind of fallacy of like, oh, we only see the ones that we know, right?
Yeah, well, I don't think it needs to even, you're right. And I think it may be even unfair to use the Kodak example, but I would say, I'll tell you a story. Years ago, when I was working with IDG, International Data Group, which was a publisher when I was there. And it was run by a guy by the name of Patrick McGovern. He was like in the Forbes Fortune 400, richest guys. He had this big publishing. It's Computer World, Info World, PC World, Computer Le Monde Informatique, Computer Volca, PC Welt. It was a huge publishing company. Anyway, I got an opportunity to travel with Pat down to New York City to an event which was called the Siebold Seminars, and it was years ago, and it was back when online publishing was just taking off. It was just starting. And Siebold Seminars was about online publishing. It was the subject matter. And we were there, and Pat was walking around. He was keynoting, and before his keynote, he was walking around the audience and, around the exhibition area. And people were coming up to him and talking to him and saying, "Pat, don't worry. This whole online publishing thing is never going to take off. Who wants to read in a small little computer screen? Nobody's going to want to do that. They're going to want the publication." So it's funny, then Pat got up on stage and he said, I've had a lot of colleagues come up to me today to try to reassure me, don't worry. I don't have to worry about online publishing disrupting my print publishing business. And he said, but I could be honest with you, it really made me nervous because I'm old enough to remember when sort of TV first emerged and everybody in radio was saying, don't worry, TV is never going to, take off. Who wants to watch a person reading the news on television? And he said, so, that made me really, really nervous. And of course, we know where TV is today and the role that TV plays in our lives. I think the same kind of scenario is true now when we say, look, the only way that people can meet, engage, network, learn, entertain themselves, shop is live. It's just not true. The reality of it is that we have moved on. That's not to say we don't want to be live. That's not to say that live won't still exist, just like radio still exists. But it means the pendulum is sort of swinging a little bit to an area where we may not be as comfortable, we may not be as knowledgeable, we may not have the kinds of experience, but there's no kind of turning it back. So just like TV, we're kind of going to figure it out. And I think that's kind of where we are now in the events world, is that we're just going to have to figure this online experience thing out. Because again, as I said, people shop, learn, they get treated for medical issues, they drive with a sat nav, we live in a world which is a hybrid world. And so the concept of hybrid event makes total sense to me. And all those people who don't want to call it a hybrid event, I'm okay with that. I'm fine, call it whatever you want, but it will be a hybrid event. And I've heard people say, well, why will people want to go online to find content if they're at a live event? Well, because they will. Because they'll hear somebody say something and immediately they'll want to look up more information about it and they'll be online. Now you can either be the steward and facilitator and providing that content link and that ability to find out more, or you cannot be. It depends on how you want to engage with that audience and how comprehensive you want to be in terms of your relationship.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I do some speaking on social media, or I did, and one of my kind of almost viral tweets that I've ever had in my career was actually, I was at a big MPI conference, and the speaker on stage, I'd done some research on him, and he mentioned this, I think it was the honeycomb of innovation. And I kind of did a very quick tweet with a link to the blog post that he created on this particular topic. And you have, what I call like a dark room of people watching the speaker. This is at a time when Twitter was working pretty well, and you just had probably a few hundred people click on that link and go like, oh, this is really interesting. You're kind of supporting the speaker and what the speaker is saying. So I'm totally with you on that kind of area.
Yeah. Well, and it happens in all parts of our lives. I can be watching TV with my kids and just wonder to myself, who is that actor anyway? And the next thing I know the actor's name, where they grew up, who they're married to, what other films they've done. It takes 5 seconds. Now that you can laugh at that and say that's not really a hybrid experience, but in fact it is. The reality of it is that we are engaged in that experience at 2 different dimensions and 2 different levels, and it enhances the experience. Now I know a lot more about that actor than I did 5 seconds ago, changes my experience. So I think, I think the thing that really worries me is that, the Indians, the industry, trying so hard to sort of resist change, that it's going to miss out on tremendous opportunities. And, wow, just imagine what we can do now with the technology that's out there and with the capabilities that we have and with the ability of our audiences to take advantage of that. I mean, these are good days for our industry, if we want to embrace the future.
Are you ready to celebrate your successes in the world of meetings and events? The Skift Meetings Awards are back for 2024, recognizing the most innovative business events companies across 15 categories, and we want you to be a part of it. Winners will feature on Skift Meetings, sending a clear signal to events professionals around the world that these are partners they can rely on. The final deadline for submissions is June 11th. We encourage you to start your submission today to secure the best entry rates. For more information and to start your submission, head to live.skift.com.
So you do a lot of speaking online and, of course, on stage as well. But I know that I do some speaking as well in virtual events, and there are certain challenges around that. And then you've written about this. What's your take on virtual speaking, and how can we make it better?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I think first of all, I'm a big fan of virtual experiences because I think there are a lot of benefits. One is that they have much greater reach and can reach people who don't travel or can't afford to travel or are disabled or whatever. I just think the accessibility of virtual experiences is a fantastic thing. There's no question about that. And I also think from an environmental and sustainability perspective, it just really does make sense. And no matter how much we talk about, greening of events and all that sort of stuff, you just can't argue with the facts that they do contribute pretty substantially. And, in some ways too, virtual experiences allow you to use media in more engaging and entertaining ways. Are we there yet? I don't think so. And therein lies the problem, is that I think virtual experiences need to be good experiences for people on both ends of the, if you were, line. And that is, for example, speakers today don't always have that great of an experience because they tend to be talking into space. They can't see anybody on many of these platforms. They don't get immediate feedback. They don't know if people are laughing, crying, or throwing things at their screen. There's no sort of relationship, and I think that's a challenge, and it because I think the quality of content in some ways requires that kind of interaction. Just talking into space is really uncomfortable for a speaker, but also not very motivating in terms of getting them excited about their subject and that sort of thing. So I think it's an area that we have to work on. As I was saying to you, I did just write a blog, which is on my website, which is called, the virtual event speaker's lament, where I did speak at an event, and I could see basically a time-delayed picture of me, which was very awkward, and a slide. I didn't know how many people were on the call. It could have been 2, could have been 2,000. Who knew? No feedback, no chat bar, nothing. And then what it was, I just kept talking until finally someone came out and said, "Thank you very much. It's over." That was not
I've
a
had
great experience.
similar experiences.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's just
and I
not a
think
great experience.
I have the same complaints in many ways, and it's made me think about how important feedback is in social circumstances. And when it comes to virtual speaking, feedback can be, like you mentioned, the chat. It can be even just a number of how many people are viewing, how many people are online. It can be people's faces, which is great. It can be emojis. It can be lots of different things. It can be questions coming through. But any sense of feedback, I think, is really important to us as humans. We often talk about networking in person really being the only way. I think a lot of that is because you can read people's reactions. If you talk about your company or project that you're doing and you can see that people aren't interested, you probably quickly change topic or talk about it in a different way or find another way to talk about things. Whilst if you're getting no feedback, you'll continue with your pitch. And if people are checking their emails, you have no idea of knowing that.
You have no idea. Yeah, people have checked out or not. And again, I've done presentations where on Zoom calls and on other platforms where you can see people's faces and you can see them reacting, and that I think that's really positive. I think a lot of it comes down to this idea that some of the best presentations that we hear, at least for me, when I hear presentations that really excite me, that I'm really interested in, they're usually story based. They're usually telling a story in some way, and I think we know that storytelling is performative. The reality of it is that telling a good story has an audience oohing and aahing and being frightened and being excited. And, so that sort of performative aspect of speaking online, needs to improve, I think, in order to improve the quality of the performances. And speaking is a performance at the end of the day. You create a narrative arc, you tell a story so everyone likes you. You take them to a place where they're scared to death, and then you show them the solution, and everybody is delighted. I think being able to do that without any kind of feedback at all is really hard to do. So I think, and I don't think it's impossible. The technology can provide that feedback, and we can see people on screen, and we've seen that happen. I mean, the Tony Robbins presentations where he's had virtual screens of 1,000 attendees, and he can call them out by name and he sees them on the wall. I mean, we know how to do it. So I think that's going to be an important development over time as we start to really improve virtual events. Now, having said that, all of that, because I said I'm a big fan of virtual events, we are still in early days, and so we tend to put up with a lot that's not great right now, but we won't forever. And so these improvements will have to come.
And do you think, I was thinking about who's to blame for this. I don't know if necessarily who's to blame is the right angle to take, but do you feel like it's the AV companies that are not aware of the stress they're causing or the kind of bad experience they're causing the speakers? Or is it the organizers that just feel like, again, no risk taking, this will make the speaker look good because the system works, so I'm just kind of get it done like this? Where do you think where do you think we can kind of crack the code and change this?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of technology over content quality, in the sense that the events industry is, as I pointed out before, very logistics oriented. It is very much about how to do something and how to get it done as flawlessly as possible, and has traditionally been less focused on what's the quality of the experience. And I think there's, I can't tell you how many keynotes I've been to where you're ushered into a dark room where they're herding you like cattle with roped off seats, and you can't sit in this row. You have to go sit in that row. Well, why? Anyway, but they do this, and you're sitting down and you're in seats so close together so that they could fit everybody into this keynote session that you have to hold your bag on your lap because you're so jammed in, and music's blaring, and the keynote speaker comes down. It's usually some executive, and they blab on basically selling because that's what they're there to do, essentially, for a really long time, usually running over the time. And then, everybody has to hustle out. Now, this is sort of, we had the load in, now we have the load out. So get everybody out of there as fast as you can. get them past the watered down coffee stations as quickly as possible because the keynoter ran over because she could, and then get them into breakout rooms with no windows in the dark with PowerPoint presentations with technical speakers who really aren't very good speakers. It's the nature of how we've created these kinds of things, which again, logistics rules over content in a way which has, generally not been a friend to content. And I think when we start thinking about people and we start, looking more human-centric about how do you engage people, what do they find entertaining, what do they find scary, what do they find, all these kinds of really starting to understand people, we're going to start thinking about experiences in a different way. And then we're going to start to say, you know what, this, even though it's possible, feasible, and possibly even flawless, it doesn't work because the experience is not what we need in order to achieve what we want to achieve with this particular profile. And that's the direction I think we're going in.
That's really interesting. I mean, I kind of feel like it's logistics driven because you want to get the maximum amount of people to attend an event at the same time, right? And then if you need to move those people around, it's not easy to move a large amount of people. So you kind of have these restrictions.
Yeah.
And when you have that amount of people, there's not a lot of options, right? You can't just let people roam free for like 20 minutes because it's nice. It's like, oh, wait, now nobody's going to go to the breakouts, right? And then you kind of lose people or something like that.
Yeah.
So it does feel like you're restricted by those kind of financial constraints. But if you measure the effectiveness on people, how much people actually learn or enjoy or whatever is the sort of main objective, and that's not really being achieved, then you probably have a good case for saying, great that we can do this, but it's not achieving the objectives that you want. Right.
Exactly. And I think we are starting to see, we're borrowing from our colleagues in the TV broadcasting business, and we're starting to learn, how to set up staging and how to use studio audiences and, how to, you'll notice, for example, in virtual events, content sessions are a lot shorter than they were in live events. And they were too long in live events. Our attention span probably is only 20 minutes, as TED Talks has been telling us for the last, 15 years. So I think, there are some things we're learning as we go along and developing virtual experiences, that content needs to be shorter. The production qualities need to be higher. There needs to be some sort of audience feedback, whether it's a limited number of virtual attendees for feedback purposes, or like a studio audience, or however we do it. We're grappling and learning as we go about how to do this. So I don't think that we're stuck by any means into this sort of where we are today, where these experiences are not that great. We're all just learning, and I think we have an opportunity to really improve it. And we're going to have to, because again, as I said, for example, I live in England, and a lot of my family live in the US. And I've basically seen more of my family in the last year and a half than I have in the last 10. On Zoom
virtually.
Yeah, virtually, inside their houses, and their new dog. And, things that I, haven't visited my sister in Florida in years. To see her house and what she's doing, so it's powerful. It's a powerful medium that, is obviously going to become an increasingly important part of how we engage and communicate with people. And it'll improve in time, I'm sure. But right now, it's pretty tough sometimes.
So I want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing. And I know that a lot of your work is this concept that we're already talking about a little bit of reimagining businesses, reimagining future opportunities. Start wherever you want to start, but I'm really curious about this whole concept of reimagining what's possible.
Yeah. So, it's an interesting idea, but, Buckminster Fuller, one of the engineering and philosophers of the past, has said, we're not meant to be the victims of the future. We're meant to be its architects. And I think there's something to that. The events industry, really took it a tough shot with the COVID situation, and a lot of people were really unprepared for change and really unprepared for imagining how they might do things in a different way. And that was rough. And it was rough on our business models, and it was rough on, people who had a certain skill set, which at the time, and for the time wasn't required. And so, it was really, really tough. But the reality of it is we do have an opportunity to imagine and to design a better and, future for our industry and for what we do. Part of that requires focusing on the value of what we do, not what we do. It's the classic marketing myopia. If you focus on your product, it can become obsolete. If you focus on the value that your product provides, that evolves, and you have an opportunity to evolve and change. And the classic example used in the book, the article Marketing Myopia, is the American railroads. They fought so hard to stay in the railroad business, they didn't realize they were in transportation. And I think that's the same for the events industry. You fight so hard to keep doing events the way you've always done them, you don't realize you're in the audience engagement business, you're in the community building business, you're in the content education and learning business. You're in it. Those businesses are, those value propositions that events in theory provided still are important and are still valuable, and it may require a different approach. And that's the challenge and the opportunity for our industry. So what we're trying to do with a lot of our clients now is just say, look, let's forget that how to do events. Let's just put it all down, and let's use a beginner's mind here and just say, let's talk about audiences and what they need. Let's talk about communities of people and what they need, and figure out all the possible ways that we might satisfy that proposition. Not how do we force fit events to satisfy that proposition, but what other ways, and what are the whole scale of ways that we might imagine. Could we imagine a future where people engaged in this way, where people met in this way, where people networked in this way, where people shopped in this way, that kinds of future? What would it look like? What would this positive future look like? And then where are we now? And how do we re-engineer and design deliberately, consciously, how to get to that future proposition? And it's kind of empowering, because it may not be, major transformation overnight, but it gives you the confidence that you can take some steps in a direction that you can visualize as a possible reinvention of the future. So that's kind of the work that we've been doing, a lot of workshop work. I've been writing a lot of articles and speaking a lot with companies about what the mindset is, what kind of mindset you require to embrace the fact that change is inevitable. It is inevitable. There's no way to avoid that. 2 is that you can be a victim of change, or you can be an architect of the future. And then 3, with the right mindset and the right kinds of design tools, you can actually create that future for your business. And so that's kind of the work that we've been doing.
That sounds really interesting. And I'm sure you get a lot of pushback, or it's not an easy task to do this. And what do you how do you work with people to overcome those challenges and overcome those, maybe limited budgets or not necessarily a clear vision for their future? Could you go into a little bit of how you get people started on this process?
Well, again, to your point, we were talking earlier about the whole idea that COVID was a real accelerator of, in some ways, of the change in our industry, and there's something to that. I think one of the things that we find is that lots of agencies and organizations, even client organizations, they're kind of worried about their future. They're worried about whether their skill set is going to be a suitable skill set for a changed future. Do they know enough about technology? Do they know end user customer psychology? Are they, is this the stuff they know how to do? Or do they know how to move furniture around, manage catering, set up lighting, the production side of things, which, by the way, is still really important. Not suggesting it's not, but that the two things now almost have equal weight. And so I think there's a willingness to learn, or at least be exposed to what the possible opportunities for the future are, as a way of overcoming the fear of unknown, of what's going to happen in the future. So yes, there's still, no one wants to sort of kumbaya and fall into your arms or anything, that's not happening. But I think most organizations realize that they sort of have to begin to be a little more deliberate about where they're headed. And It's really interesting that some of the agencies I've worked with, they were so busy, they were so successful, they were making so much money that it was kind of like, we don't need to worry about the future. We just need to keep busy. We don't have enough staff. We're busy and we're running, our hair's on fire. So we're not planning for our future. And I think maybe this gave us a little opportunity, in a sense. It's a little break where we could say, you know what? We can't control things necessarily. We don't have control over the environment. We don't have control over illnesses. We don't have control over changes in technology. And we need to be mindful of that. And we need to, as part of a successful business, have a contingency to what the future might look like and how we're moving in the right direction. So I think you are getting more acceptance.
Interesting. Do you have a clear vision of what the future looks like for the industry?
Well, I think we're moving. There are lots of scenarios out there about the future, obviously, but I think we are, the technology alone around us today and its capabilities, we are moving to, I think, in a world where we do live in a much more live and online world, much more in technology enhanced lifestyle. That's from having, toothbrushes that tell you when you have, a cavity or you have too much plaque, to the soap, the Alexa soap dispenser now that plays a song, so you know how long to wash your hands, to sat nav, where you don't actually ever need to look at a map and you can feel quite confident to get wherever you're going, to the way we consume content in, for example, gaming and online gaming today, and the numbers of people that online gaming reaches and the engagement levels that it consumes, the changes in how we shop, and the end of the sort of retail world and retailers becoming more experience centers rather than stockists, because it makes more sense to have that online. There's just so many fundamental changes that are occurring in how we live that it's only natural that the world of events will need to change, and we'll need to embrace, some of those changes and become, more tech integrated in terms of how it provides experiences and how it builds communities and how it, distributes content. So I think, the future definitely looks more like that. Now, having said that, that's at the very front of the sort of bus, if you will. There's generations of people coming up in the world who don't have access to technology in quite the way that they should. And we need to be cognizant of that too. And we need to be making sure that when we are designing experiences, we're thinking about accessibility and access, and we're thinking about sustainability, and we're thinking about not just things that are desirable, but things that, not things that just are desirable by our audiences, but things that are beneficial. And there's a lot of talk in the industry now about purpose and all that sort of thing, but what a tremendous opportunity our industry has to help facilitate some of that purpose. And so I see a more purposeful, I see a more technology orientated, I see a more human centric, that is much more personal, more personality driven and less process driven future. And, they're the kinds of things that I think most organizations need to, and many are building towards now.
That sounds like a pretty promising future. And it sounds like we're kind of, I was going to say taking baby steps. We're not really taking baby steps. I think we're taking kind of enforced large steps at the moment, but we're still kind of in the early days. Kim.
Yeah, I think, and this is one of the things that I've been saying recently in some of my writing is that, there's debate out there is like, where people saying, hybrid, doesn't mean anything. And, they're just events, and events have always been hybrid, and, all that kind of thing. Words matter. They matter a lot. And how we talk about our future and how we talk about our industry and our ambitions for our future and for our industry are important, because they, not only are they motivational, but they're informative in terms of helping people realize that imagining new ways of doing things makes sense. Having more diverse input makes sense. Like having young people tell you, I don't want to go to a trade show because it doesn't work for me, is powerful, when we think about what the future is going to look like. So I think, all of those kinds of using that empathy and that more human-centric approach, whether you call it design thinking or whatever you want to call it, I think will get us there. It is a matter of just making the commitment to embrace change and to explore innovation. And I think you can do that profitably. I don't think it needs to be something that businesses need to sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think the reality of it is that you can make money being purposeful and innovating. And I think lots of companies have proven that.
Great stuff, Kim. That's fascinating, and I think it's a very positive view of the future, which I think is needed. There's no point in thinking of the future as negative. Where can people find you if they want to find you, if they want to get in touch? What's the best way to do that?
Well, so my email is, I could give you my email. It's just Kim, Kim, at xdesigned.com. Okay. Pretty simple.
And that's the URL for your website?
The website is xdesign.com.
Perfect. xdesign.com. Excellent.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you one last question, which is something we're asking all our guests. And I hope I don't put you on the spot too much, which is we'd love to have a recommendation from you for a person to have on the podcast in the future. So anybody come to mind that you think we should interview?
Well, I think someone who was very influential to me in my thinking and who speaks often, his name is Frans Johansson. And he wrote the Medici, and the whole idea of diverse input to design is really, really important in his world. So the whole idea of the Medici effect, two ideas that don't look like they have anything to do with one another come together to create a third, is pretty central to his consulting business, but I think pretty inspirational too in terms of some of the tools that we're using in helping agencies and clients start to think about, if all of you have all worked together for the last 10 years, don't you think we should bring some other people in here who might have some different perspectives, because two of you are afraid to ever say anything and two of you say everything. And, so building that kind of more diverse environment of an open environment of discourse and of ideation is something that he has really stood for all of his career, and I think has worked with some big corporations and made some huge progress in those corporations. So I'd love to hear him speak on your podcast.
That's a great recommendation. Thank you very much for that. We'll see what we can do. We'll get you to put us in touch with him so we can.
Yeah, I can do that. So let me know.
Kim, thanks again. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for being on the podcast with us today. Wish you lots of success and look forward to seeing more of your writing and more of your work and hopefully seeing you in person very soon.
Thanks, Miguel.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Event Manager Podcast. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. For the latest news and the best articles on technology and innovation in the event industry, head over to eventmb.com.